My name is Anthony Washington, and I've been a homeowner in the Pinehurst neighborhood for nearly 5 years now. It's a quiet suburb with well-kept lawns and neighbors who generally mind their business, except for Nancy, the self-appointed neighborhood watchdog who lives 3 houses down from me on Oak Ridge Drive. I'd purchased my home at 423 Oak Ridge primarily because of the spacious backyard and the charming 400 FT guest house that came with it. As a software engineer who occasionally hosts relatives from out of town, having that extra space was perfect. Currently, my brother Leon was staying there while transitioning between jobs. What most neighbors didn't know was that Leon wasn't just my brother. He was Chief of Police Leon Washington from Riverdale County, about an hour away. He'd taken a month of accumulated leave to decompress before starting his new position with the State Bureau. That Sunday had started like any other. I was grilling some chicken for lunch, enjoying the spring weather in my backyard when I heard someone calling over my fence. "Hello, yo-hoo, Mr. Washington." I recognized Nancy's voice immediately and felt my shoulders tense. In my 5 years here, every interaction with her had been uncomfortable at best, from complaints about my music, which was never allowed, to questioning delivery people who came to my house, just making sure they belonged here. Nancy had made it clear that she considered herself entitled to police my existence in the neighborhood. "Yes, Mrs. Gladwell," I replied, setting down my tongs and walking toward the fence. "Could I have a quick word with you about something important? It'll just take a minute." I reluctantly opened the side gate to find Nancy, a 60-something woman, with bleached blonde hair styled in that signature, "Can I speak to the manager?" cut, wearing a bright green velour tracksuit despite the warm weather. Standing slightly behind her was a heavy-set young white man who looked to be about 18 or 19, stuffing potato chips into his mouth from a family-sized bag. He wore a faded Batman t-shirt stretched tight across his belly and what appeared to be Spider-Man pajama shorts with mysterious stains down one leg. "This is my son Trevor," Nancy announced proudly as if introducing the mayor. "Say hello, Trevor." Trevor grunted something unintelligible, spraying a few chip fragments in my direction. "Nice to meet you," I said politely, though I was becoming increasingly aware that this wasn't a social call. "What can I help you with today?" Nancy's smile widened in that peculiar way that told me she was about to ask for something inappropriate. "Well, I noticed you have that lovely little guest house back there," she said, pointing past me toward my property. And it got me thinking about poor Trevor's situation. Trevor didn't look particularly poor to me. In fact, judging by the designer sneakers on his feet, he seemed quite comfortable. "You see," Nancy continued, now pushing past me to walk further into my yard without invitation, "Trevor is really trying to become independent. He's at that age, you know, but the rental market is just ridiculous these days." I followed her, trying to process what was happening. "I'm sorry to hear that. It's definitely tough out there for first-time renters." "Exactly," Nancy exclaimed, now standing directly in front of my guest house, hands on her hips as she assessed it like a property appraiser. "So, when I saw this perfect little space just sitting here—" "It's not sitting here," I interrupted, a sinking feeling in my stomach. "My brother is currently living in it." Nancy waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, but surely that's temporary. Trevor needs a place to start his independent life. He's got big plans, don't you, Trevor?" Trevor, who had followed us into my yard, mumbled something about developing an app while dropping chip crumbs on my freshly mowed lawn. "Mrs. Gladwell," I said firmly, "I'm not looking for a tenant, and even if I were, I wouldn't." "Oh, we're not talking about renting," Nancy cut in, her voice honey-sweet, but her eyes cold as ice. "I was thinking more of a community arrangement. You've got this extra space that's bigger than anything Trevor would need. It would be the neighborly thing to do." I stared at her, momentarily speechless. Was she really suggesting that I should let her adult son live in my guest house for free? "The neighborly thing," I repeated slowly, "would be to respect other people's property and privacy." Nancy's smile faltered. "Well, I don't think you understand the opportunity here. Trevor could be like a caretaker for your property when you're away." Trevor chose that moment to belch loudly and toss his empty chip bag onto my grass. I think I'll pass, I said, struggling to maintain my composure. Now, if you'll excuse me, I was in the middle of something. That's when Nancy dropped all pretense of pleasantness. Her eyes narrowed, and she jabbed a finger at my chest. Listen. Here, she hissed, her voice dropping an octave. People like you should be grateful that someone from our family would even consider living on your property. Do you know how much we've done for this neighborhood? My husband was on the HOA board before he passed. The implication in people like you wasn't lost on me. I'd heard enough coded language in my 40 years to recognize what she meant. Mrs. Gladwell, I said, keeping my voice level despite my rising anger. I think you should leave now. Leave? Nancy scoffed, planting her feet firmly on my lawn. We're just getting started with this discussion. Trevor needs his independence, but he also needs support. He shouldn't have to pay those ridiculous rental prices just to get started in life. Trevor had wandered over to peer through the guest house window, his hands and face pressed against the glass like a child at a candy store. I could see smudges, forming where his greasy fingers touched the clean surface that I just washed yesterday. Trevor, I called out sharply, please step away from the window. He turned and gave me a look of such entitled indignation that I almost laughed. Almost? Mom said this place would be perfect. He whined, his voice surprisingly high-pitched for his size. It's got its own bathroom and everything. How would you know that? I asked, alarm bells ringing in my head. We peeked in last Tuesday when you were at work, Nancy replied casually, as if admitting to trespassing on my property was completely normal, just to get a feel for the space. The audacity left me momentarily speechless. These people had been snooping around my property while I wasn't home. Mrs. Gladwell, I said, my patience evaporating. You and Trevor need to leave my property right now. You had no right to be here when I wasn't home, and you have no right to demand use of my guest house. Nancy's face hardened. Now see here, Anthony, I can call you Anthony, right? I think you're being unreasonable. Trevor just needs the guest house for a few months while he gets on his feet. A few months? I echoed incredulously. 6 at most, she continued, as if we were negotiating rather than her making outrageous demands. And of course, he'd need access to your Wi-Fi. He's developing an app, as he mentioned. Oh, and the use of your kitchen would be helpful since that kitchenette in there is rather limited. Trevor nodded enthusiastically. And I like to eat breakfast. Around noon, but I'm up gaming until about 3 a.m. most nights. I took a deep breath. Let me be perfectly clear. Trevor will not be living in my guest house. Not for 6 months, not for 6 days, not for 6 minutes. This conversation is over, and you both need to leave my property immediately. Nancy's face transformed then, her practiced suburban pleasantness giving way to something ugly and raw. You know, when we heard a single black man had bought the Andersons' old place, my husband said we should give you a chance. He said maybe you'd be one of the good ones, but I see now he was wrong. The slur hung in the air between us, her true colors finally showing. Get off my property, I said quietly, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. Or what? Nancy sneered. You'll call the police? Go ahead. My cousin's husband plays golf with Captain Phillips. They'll take one look at this situation and see who belongs here and who doesn't. What Nancy didn't know was that at that exact moment, the door to my guest house had opened, and my brother Leon was standing there in sweatpants and a faded police academy t-shirt, taking in the scene with a calm, assessing gaze that had made him an effective law enforcement officer for over 20 years. Is there a problem here, Anthony? Leon asked, his voice carrying the natural authority that came with his position. Nancy turned, clearly startled by the new presence. She quickly regained her composure and put on her most charming smile. No problem at all. We're just having a neighborly discussion about Trevor here, potentially using the guest house. The guest house where I'm currently living? Leon asked, mildly, stepping fully out onto the small porch. Oh, I didn't realize someone was actually staying there. Nancy lied smoothly. Anthony didn't mention that. I did actually, I corrected her. About 5 minutes ago. Well, surely it's just a temporary arrangement, Nancy pressed, looking between Leon and me. Trevor's needs are rather urgent. Leon crossed his arms over his chest. Ma'am, from what I overheard, it sounds like you're trespassing on my brother's property and making demands rather than requests. Is that accurate? Nancy's expression soured. And who exactly are you to question me? This is between me and Anthony. Leon Washington, my brother replied calmly. Chief of Police, Riverdale County. The color drained from Nancy's face so quickly, I thought she might faint. Trevor, who had been picking at something in his ear, suddenly froze. You're a police officer? Nancy stammered, her confident demeanor cracking like thin ice under pressure. Chief of Police, Leon corrected gently. And while I'm off duty and outside my jurisdiction, I'm still a witness to what appears to be criminal trespass and harassment. Trevor had started backing away slowly, like a child caught with his hand in the cookie jar. Mom, maybe we should go. But Nancy wasn't ready to surrender her mission. Years of getting her way through sheer force of will, and the privilege of her skin color had made her incapable of backing down, even when faced with authority. Now see here, she said, drawing herself up to her full 5'3" height. I'm simply trying to help my son become independent. Anthony here has all this extra space he's clearly not using effectively. Leon raised an eyebrow. Ma'am, I've been staying in this guest house for the past 2 weeks. It's very much in use. But you'll leave eventually, Nancy insisted. And then what? It'll just sit empty while my poor Trevor is forced to live under my roof, stunting his development as a man. Trevor, who had been unsuccessfully trying to hide his substantial frame behind a potted plant, nodded vigorously. Yeah, how am I supposed to bring girls home with my mom in the next room? I couldn't help myself. Is that really a pressing concern for you, Trevor? Leon shot me a warning look, but I could see the corner of his mouth twitching. Nancy's face flushed red. How dare you? My Trevor is quite the catch. He just needs his own space to flourish. Mrs. Gladwell, Leon interjected calmly, regardless of your son's dating prospects, my brother is under no obligation to provide housing for him. This is private property, and you've been asked to leave multiple times. I'm not leaving until we come to an arrangement, Nancy declared, folding her arms across her chest. I know my rights. Do you? Leon asked, his voice still measured, but with an edge of steel. Now, because right now, you're committing criminal trespass. In most jurisdictions, that's a misdemeanor punishable by up to a year in jail and a substantial fine. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Nancy's face. But like many who've rarely faced consequences for their actions, she doubled down. You're just trying to intimidate me, she accused, pulling out her phone. Well, two can play that game. I'm calling the actual police, the ones with jurisdiction here. I exchanged glances with Leon, who gave me a subtle nod. We both knew how this would play out. Nancy dialed 911 with dramatic flair, holding the phone to her ear while maintaining aggressive eye contact with me. 911, what's your emergency? I could hear the dispatcher's voice faintly through the speaker. Yes, hello, Nancy said in a voice that had suddenly become tremulous and frightened. I need police assistance immediately. I'm at 423 Oak Ridge Drive in Pinehurst. There's a man here threatening me and my son. Leon sighed deeply, pulling out his own phone and sending a quick text message. I knew from experience he was probably contacting colleagues in the local department, giving them a heads up about the situation. Can you describe the nature of the threat, ma'am? The dispatcher asked. Nancy looked at me, clearly trying to think of something specific. He's told us he'll hurt us if we don't leave his property. My son and I were just asking about potentially renting his guest house, and he became aggressive and threatening. I shook my head in disbelief. That's absolutely false. Now he's denying it, Nancy shrieked into the phone. Please send someone quickly. We're frightened for our safety. Trevor, catching on to his mother's strategy, suddenly adopted a cowering posture that looked ridiculous on his large frame. He's really scary, Mom. He stage whispered loudly enough for the dispatcher to hear. Officers are being dispatched to your location, the dispatcher informed her. Please stay on the line. Nancy smiled triumphantly at me. The police will sort this out. They always do. The implication was clear. She expected her whiteness to be the trump card in this confrontation. How many times had this worked for her before? How many black men had been wrongfully painted as aggressors by women like Nancy Gladwell? Mrs. Gladwell, I said calmly, There are security cameras covering my entire property, including right where we're standing. Everything that's happened here has been recorded, including your admission that you trespassed on my property while I wasn't home. This was a bluff. I'd been meaning to install security cameras but hadn't gotten around to it yet. However, the sudden panic on Nancy's face was worth the white lie. "Hi, that's not," she sputtered. "Also," Leon added, "I've been recording our conversation on my phone since I came outside. Standard procedure when confronting potential criminal activity. That part wasn't a bluff. I knew my brother well enough to know he'd activated his recording app the moment he sensed trouble. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder as they approached my address. NY's expression shifted from smugness to uncertainty, but she quickly rallied. "Good. The real police are coming. We'll see what they have to say about this situation." 2 police cruisers pulled up in front of my house within minutes, their lights flashing but sirens now silent. 4 officers emerged, 2 from each vehicle. The first pair approached cautiously, hands near their holsters, as they've been trained to do when responding to reports of threats. "Over here!" Nancy called out, waving her arms wildly. "We're the ones who called. This man has been threatening us." The officers approached, their expressions professionally neutral. "I'm Officer Rodriguez. This is Officer Chan," the first officer introduced himself. "We received a report of threats being made." Nancy immediately launched into her fabricated version of events. "Yes, my son Trevor and I came over to politely inquire about renting the guest house. And this man," she pointed at me accusingly, "became hostile and threatening, telling us he would hurt us if we didn't leave." Officer Rodriguez turned to me. "Sir, can I have your name, please?" "Anthony Washington," I replied calmly. "This is my property at 423 Oak Ridge Drive. These individuals came onto my property uninvited and refused to leave when asked multiple times." "He's lying," Nancy interjected. "We were invited to discuss the rental arrangement." "There was never any rental arrangement," I clarified. "Mrs. Gladwell demanded that I allow her son to live in my guest house for free. When I declined, she refused to leave my property." Officer Chan was taking notes while Rodriguez continued questioning. "Does anyone else live at this residence?" Before I could answer, Leon stepped forward, extending his hand. "Leon Washington, Chief of Police, Riverdale County. I'm Anthony's brother, currently staying in the guest house during my leave." The officers straightened almost imperceptibly, recognizing one of their own. Officer Rodriguez shook Leon's hand. "Chief Washington, I believe Captain Mercer has mentioned you before. James Mercer." "Good man," Leon replied with a nod. "Listen, I've been recording the interaction since I came outside." He held up his phone. "Mrs. Gladwell and her son entered the property uninvited, demanded use of the guest house free of charge, and when asked to leave, she called 911 with false allegations." NY's face had gone from confident to panicked in seconds. He can't record me without my permission. That's illegal." "Actually, ma'am," Officer Chen spoke up. "In this state, single-party consent is all that's required for recording conversations. If Chief Washington was part of the conversation, he had every legal right to record it." The second pair of officers had been examining the perimeter of the property and now approached. "The neighbors across the street say they saw this woman and young man enter the property uninvited," one of them reported. The neighbor stated they've witnessed similar behavior from this woman with other residents. NY's righteous indignation crumbled further. Linda said that, "But she's my friend." Mrs. Gladwell also admitted to entering my property without permission. "Earlier this week when I wasn't home," I added. "She mentioned peeking in last Tuesday while I was at work." Officer Rodriguez turned to Nancy. "Ma'am, is that true? Did you enter this property without the owner's permission on a previous occasion?" Nancy's demeanor changed instantly, tears welling up in her eyes. I was just trying to help my son. You don't understand how hard it is for young people these days," she sniffled. Trevor, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly found his voice. "Mom, stop. This is embarrassing." He turned to me. "Sorry, man. I told her this was a stupid idea." Nancy gasped at her son's betrayal. "Trevor, I'm only trying to help you become independent by begging strangers for free housing." Trevor shot back. "That's not independence, Mom." That's just transferring dependency from you to someone else. I blinked in surprise. Perhaps there was hope for Trevor after all. Officer Rodriguez addressed Nancy firmly. Ma'am, based on the evidence and witness statements, you entered this property without permission and refused to leave when asked. That constitutes criminal trespass. Additionally, you made a false report to emergency services, which is a separate offense. You're arresting me? Nancy shrieked, her voice reaching a pitch that probably had dogs howling 3 blocks away. But I'm the victim here. No one said anything about arrest, Officer Chen clarified. But you will be issued citations for criminal trespass and misuse of the 911 system. These are misdemeanors that carry potential fines. This is outrageous. Nancy was in full meltdown mode now. Do you know who my husband was? He was the treasurer of the HOA for 8 years.